up here. So Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everybody. Another wonderful Shabbat that we've made it to through a tough work week. And I'm grateful that I'm back on the connection here. I've got a little bit better connection this morning, so looking forward to the study. And so we'll get started with a prayer and some music if we have it. So Abba Father, we thank you for this Shabbat. And for this time that we can glean from your scriptures, from your Torah, and the prophets, and the other writings, and the Brit Hadasha. We just pray you will be at the center of our fellowship and our studies this morning. We pray against any enemy interference, Abba, that you scatter the enemy away from us and away from our dwelling places, and that we may have a set-apart gathering today. In Yeshua's name, amen. All right. Brother Richard, you got a song?
Yeah, I'm having some musical instrument difficulties, but you got your shofar, Max?
No, I'm without anything at all.
Okay. I've got one here. I heard there was a secret chord that David played that pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the A minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Your faith is strong, you need a proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair, broke your throne, she cut your hair, and from her lips she drew the hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Maybe I've been here before, I know this room and walk the floor. I used to live alone before I knew you. I seen your flag on a marble arch. Love is not a victory march. It's cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. There was a time when you let me know what's really going on the globe, but now you never show it to me, do you? I remember when I moved you in, the Holy Spirit was moving too. But every breath you drew the hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I know that there's a God above, and all I ever learned from love was how to shoot at someone who outgrew you. Not a cry, you can hear it right. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's cold and it's a broken hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Amen. That tune will be in my head all day now.
Praise God. Anybody else have anything with us here this morning? All right, we'll go ahead and get into the scripture reading portion. And today is the Torah portion is called Miketz, from the end. Miketz, and it starts in Genesis chapter 41, and it goes to chapter 44, verse 17. Then we have Haftorah reading from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 15 through chapter 4, verse 1, depending on how your verses are ordered in your version of the scriptures. And then we have in the Brit Hadasha, we have the Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. Okay, so we want to avoid any kind of contentions this morning, and just stick with the word here before us. We know that in the book of Acts it says they were reading the Torah in the every Shabbat. They were reading the Torah in every city where there was a synagogue or an assembly, and so we're just really just continuing. We're continuing that this morning, and we read a chapter at a time and press in and discuss that together, and see what Abba has for us and what Yah's put on your heart. So who would like to start us out with Bereshit, Genesis chapter 41 this morning? And please share what version you're reading from so we can follow along and reference that later if we need to. Okay, I'll start out on chapter 41.
Chris, I can start if you want.
Okay, go ahead, brother.
Okay, I'm reading from the JPS 1985 edition, and starting with chapter 41:1. After 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. When out of the Nile there came up 7 cows, handsome and sturdy, and they grazed in the reed grass. But presently 7 other cows came up from the Nile close behind them, ugly and gaunt, and stood beside the cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows, and Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. But close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 solid full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke. It was a dream. The next morning his spirit was agitated, and he sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. The chief cupbearer then spoke up and said to Pharaoh, I must make mention today of my offenses. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me in custody in the house of the chief steward, together with the chief baker. We had dreams the same night, he and I, each of us a dream with a meaning of its own. A Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the chief steward. And when we told him our dreams, he interpreted them for us, telling each of the meaning of his dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my post, and the other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed from the dungeon. He had his hair cut and changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I have heard it said of you that for you to hear a dream is to tell its meaning. Joseph answered the Pharaoh, saying, Not I. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows, and grazed in the reed grass. Presently there followed them 7 other cows, scrawny, ill-formed, and emaciated. Never had I seen their likeness for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the 7 lean cows ate up the first 7 cows, the sturdy ones, but when they had consumed them, no one could tell they had consumed them, for they looked just as bad as before. And I awoke. In my other dream, I saw 7 ears of grain, full and healthy, growing on a single stalk, but right behind them sprouted 7 ears, shriveled, thin, and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 healthy ears. I have told my magicians, but none has an explanation for me. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It is the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as also are the 7 empty ears scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance in all of the land of Egypt. After them will come 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. As the land is ravaged by famine, no trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter, for it will be very severe. As for Pharaoh having had the same dream twice, it means the matter has been determined by God and that God will soon carry it out. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom, and set him up over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of these good years that are coming be gathered, and let the grains be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food to be stored in the cities. Let that food be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will come on the land of Egypt, so the land may not perish in the famine. The plan pleased Pharaoh and all his courtiers. And Pharaoh said to his courtiers, Could we find another man like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has made all this known to you, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. Pharaoh further said to Joseph, See, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt. And removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand, and he had him dressed in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain on his neck. He had him ride in the chariot of his second in command and cried before them, Abrek. Thus he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, yet without you no one shall lift up a hand or a foot in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh then gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him for a wife Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Then Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Leaving Pharaoh's presence, Joseph traveled through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of plenty, the land produced in abundance, and he gathered all the grain of the 7 years that the land of Egypt was enjoying, and stored the grain in the cities. He put in each city the grain of the fields around it. So Joseph collected produce in very large quantity, like the sands of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the years of famine came, Joseph became the father of 2 sons, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, meaning God has made me forget completely my hardship in my parental home. And the second he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. The 7 years of abundance that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end, and 7 years of famine set in, just as Joseph had foretold. There was famine in all the lands, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt felt hunger, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph, whatever he tells you, you shall do. Accordingly, when the famine became severe in the land of Egypt, Joseph laid open all that was within and rationed out the grain to the Egyptians. The famine, however, spread over the whole world, so that the world came to Joseph in Egypt to procure rations, for the famine had become severe throughout the world.
All right, very good. Okay, Anybody have anything from chapter 41 here, please? Thoughts or questions or comments? Go ahead, Brother John.
I think it's pretty cool how how Egypt was had enough to store due to the wisdom and the envision that they got through the Father, how they were able to store enough not only just for Egypt but for the entire world. So I thought that's pretty interesting, because they just didn't store up enough for themselves; they stored up more than enough.
I think too, another interesting part here is in verse 43, where it says he had him ride in a chariot to set a second command, and they cried before him, Abrek. It's another way of saying that, or the term in this used there is a command that all will bow before him. All will bow before Joseph as he comes throughout the land. And I just go to the scriptures that refers to, again, Yeshua, because there's so many types and shadows of Joseph with Yeshua, that every knee will bow and every tongue confess. So I found that interesting. The Egyptians, the people of Egypt, were all bowing before Joseph, and the entire world will bow before. In fact, the whole world was bowing before Joseph, because when they would come to collect rations, collect food, they had to come before him and bow. So we have the type and shadow there of every knee bowing and every tongue confessing that he is Lord.
That word that's used there is basically the same word for bless. Barach, avarach or avrech is to bless or to bend the knee, to bow.
Right. I think it's also important to point out that Joseph mentions that because that he dreamed the same dream twice, Pharaoh did, that it's something that is a matter that is set, that is not to be changed. And we see in Scripture quite a few times where Yeshua says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you," and it's meaning the same thing. When he says that twice, whatever he's saying is to be unchanged. It's set in stone.
It's like two or three witnesses to establish a matter as well. That precept. Anybody else?
You're breaking up, Chris.
Chris, are you still with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I heard you say, "Can you hear me?"
Well, if no one else has anything on 41, we can go on to 42, I guess.
Who's doing 42? You want me to do that one?
Andy, you want to do it?
I'll do 42 if you want, Chris.
Okay, brother, go ahead.
All right. I'm reading from the New American Standard Version. Okay. Now Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I am afraid that harm may befall him." So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." But Joseph had recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to look at the undefended parts of our land." Then they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are the sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." Yet he said to them, "No, but you have come to look at the undefended parts of our land." But they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." And Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. But this you will be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. But if not, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Now Joseph said to them on the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined in your prison. But as for the rest of you, go, carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and you will not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "Truly, we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore, this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered and said, saying, "Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood." They did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. And he turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and spoke to them, he took Simon from them and bound him before their eyes. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, and to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money, and behold, it was in the mouth of his sack. Then he said to his brothers, "My money has been returned, and behold, it is even in my sack." And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, "The Lord of the land spake harshly to us, and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, We are honest men, we are not spies. We are the 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father today in the land of Canaan. And the man of the Lord of the land said to us, By this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, that I may know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will give your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. Now it came about, as they were emptying their sacks, that they beheld every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were dismayed. And their father Jacob said to them, You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simon is no more, and you will take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, You may put my 2 sons to death, if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I will return him to you. But Jacob said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm should befall him on the journey, you are taken, then you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow.
Thank you, Brother John. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on this chapter, please?
Yeah, so there we have Benjamin, which was the only other child born unto Rahel, who Rahel died giving birth to Benjamin. And besides Joseph, that was the only child he had from Rahel. So I could see, and he was the youngest, so I could see why he was really guarded with that one.
I think verse 8, where it says, For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. How is that? I mean, I love this. I said it over and over again. I love this story because of all the types and shadows of Messiah. But how is that one a type and shadow of Messiah? How was Yeshua disguised that his brothers didn't, or the people of Israel didn't recognize him?
When he comes back from the grave, and his own disciples and family didn't recognize him.
That's part of it, but just Yah coming in human form. He came to Israel in a form of like we are, and they wouldn't recognize that's not what they expected. They're expecting this conquering king to come in and throw out the Romans, but he came as a humble servant instead. So he wasn't recognized for that reason. I gotta say, last night I went to a Erev Shabbat synagogue, not far from where I live here, or where we're at, and they're not Messianic. It was kind of a sort of a catch-all, I guess. They're not Orthodox and they're not Reformed. It was just a non-denominational Jewish synagogue, if you will. And he talked. They read a portion of Miketz, and I have to say, I was the message that the rabbi there gave was, I thought it was very sad that nothing about Yeshua is mentioned, because they don't believe in Yeshua. And as I was listening to him read this and talk about it, was just leaving these types and shadows out, not recognizing the Messiah as a suffering servant through all these things, and even read from Isaiah. They read from Isaiah. Oh, I'm trying to think of the verse now. It was verse 1. I think of like
61.
Pardon me?
It was probably Isaiah 61.
It was Isaiah. I know it was verse 1, but I want to say it was like 47 or something. But it refers to salvation is soon coming, and his righteousness, God's righteousness will soon be revealed. I couldn't help but sit there and think salvation in Hebrew is Yeshua, and they just miss it. They just miss it all, and it's very, very sad. Half the story of Joseph is being missed.
Max, remember last week when you said something and I said, how do you think it was during like 1,000 years before Yahushua was born, right? How the people reading that particular verse would have been interpreting that particular verse we were discussing last week. Well, the same thing on this that you're referring to of that particular synagogue. This is probably how some of the people during right before Yahushua was born, how they might have been interpreting, like, they not knowing the person of Yahushua,
That's true, and what his message last night wasn't wrong. It's just missing half of it. What he was talking about last night was taking all the events of Joseph's life, and how looking at it from Joseph's from his view, from his aspect. Joseph had no idea why these things were happening to him. He had no idea of the events that were about to come. All he was living in was the there and now, and being in prison and accused falsely, and all the things that had befallen him. But when we look back on his life and everything, we realize that Yah is control. He's in control of all the events of our lives, of the political things climbing around us. And though we can't see it from each individual day and each individual life, as we're going through this day by day, we have to have that kind of faith that regardless of what happens, Yah is in charge, and nothing is by chance. Nothing is random. Everything is for a reason. And so the message was a good one. It's just missing out on half of what it's really all about.
I really like
Andy,
that
did you have
point.
something to share from that?
I really like the point that was just made about how that rabbi was probably giving the same sort of message that was probably given by Jews pre-resurrection. It's really insightful.
I think too, with that kind of a message, it speaks to the Jewish people all down through the centuries, because they are the most persecuted people on the planet, always have been, and I think it just speaks to them that no matter what happens, no matter what kind of persecution they and we go under, as long as we keep Yah first in our lives and trust in Him, somehow in the big picture, it will all come to fruition, and just be better lives at some point, better for us all.
I want to make sure we don't leave anybody out. Brother Andy, did you have something to share, brother, before when your microphone?
Yeah, I was wondering if you thought that Joseph was angry, because I've always had the belief that he was angry at his brothers and he didn't believe them when he told them that they have another younger brother at home.
The whole thing, as I understand it, was a way of him testing his brothers because of what they had done, how far they'd be willing to go to protect or get rid of Benjamin.
I think that's probably why Jacob probably was so protective of Benjamin, is because that he probably didn't he probably always suspected his older sons of foul play. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not saying that's a fact, but they were out with Joseph when he supposedly was teared to pieces or whatever, and so maybe he said, I'm not sending out Benjamin with them alone. I don't know, right? But you also have to wonder, how come Joseph, now that he is like second in charge of Egypt, how come he never took the opportunity to go back home and say, hey, Dad, I think that's probably the father probably leading him not to go back home, because the father knew in advance what would happen in this particular, few chapters of Genesis. So.
Well, I think too it's interesting that Judah or Yehuda, he comes to Benjamin's defense basically, and takes responsibility of his care and protection. And then later on, when Israel as a nation goes into the promised land, and the lands are divided up, it's Judah and Benjamin who are the southern tribes, and they stay together. And even their borders, as I understand it, go right through the Temple Mount, and they share the borders of the Temple Mount. So their connection goes all the way back to this particular event.
Yeah, I agree, Max. I believe that we're going to read here, I think today, like a chapter or two from now, about how Joseph knew that this matter was from our father, that he was sold into slavery. And so therefore he wasn't angry with his brothers, because he knew that our father had caused it to be this way. I believe it's in chapter 45. We're going to read about that.
Amen.
Anybody else have anything that you gleaned from this chapter, or any questions about it? Okay, let's move on to Genesis 43. Who would like to read that, please? Okay, I'll go ahead and do it. 43 in the scriptures, ISR, says, but the scarcity of food was severe in the land, and it came to be when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Mitzrayim that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. But Yehuda spoke to him, saying, the man vehemently warned us, saying, you do not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you let our brother go with us, we go down and buy you food. But if you do not let him go, we do not go down, because the man said to us, you do not see my face unless your brother is with you. And Yisrael said, why did you do evil to me, to inform the man that you still had another brother? And they said, the man kept asking about us and our relatives, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we informed him according to these words. How could we know that he would say, bring your brother down? And Yehuda said to Yisrael his father, send the boy with me, and let us arise and go and live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself shall stand guarantee for him. From my hand you are to require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not delayed, Truly by now we could have returned this second time. And their father Israel said to them, if so, then do this. Take some of the best fruit of the land in your vessels and bring a present down for the man, a little balm and a little honey, spices and myrrh, nuts and almonds. And take double silver in your hand, and take back in your hand the silver that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. It could have been a mistake. And take your brother and arise, go back to the man, and El Shaddai give to you compassion before the man, so that he shall release your other brother, and Benjamin and I. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. And the men took that present, and Benjamin, and they took double the amount of silver in their hand, and arose and went down to Mitzrayim and stood before Yosef. And Yosef saw Benjamin with them, and said to the one over his house, bring the men home and make a great slaughter, and prepare, for these men are to eat with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph said, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the silver which was put back into our sacks the first time that we are brought in, to throw himself upon us and fall upon us, to take us as slaves, our donkeys too. So they came near to the man over the house of Joseph, and spoke to him at the door of the house, and said, oh, my master, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it came to be, when we came to the lodging place, that we opened our sacks, and saw each man's silver in the mouth of his sack, our silver in its weight. And we have brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other silver in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our silver in our sacks. But he said, peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your Elohim and the Elohim of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. Your silver had come to me. And he brought Shimon out to them. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house, and gave them water, and they washed their feet. And he gave their donkeys fodder. And they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they were to eat there. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed down before him to the earth. And he asked them about their welfare, and said, is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive? And they said, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed their heads down and did obeisance. And he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, Elohim show favor to you, my son. And Joseph hurried, for his emotions were deeply moved toward his brother. And he looked for a place to weep, and went into his room and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out and controlled himself, and said, serve the food. And they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Mitzrites who ate with him by themselves, for the Mitzrites could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Mitzrites. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at each other in astonishment. And he took portions to them from before him, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they feasted and they drank with him. Okay, anybody have anything to share on this chapter, please?
Yeah. So we go into, we see in verse, let's see, verse 11 and 12, where Jacob was really concerned about Benjamin, and Yehuda assured him. And when he agreed to go ahead and let Benjamin go down there with him, what Jacob did was very interesting, because Jacob, he guarded 2 of the right rulings that are listed in Exodus chapter 22. Verse 11 says, the father Israel said to them, If so, then do this. Take some of the best fruit of the land of your vessels, and bring a present down for the men, a little balm, a little honey, and spices, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. And take double silver in your hand, and take back in your hand the silver that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. It could have been a mistake. Now, though their fields were bare, that's why they had to go down for grain, because they didn't have any grain of their own. He took some of the best of what they did have. They did have some nuts and some almonds and some honey and some spices and such. And that's related to a right ruling in Exodus 22 that I'll post here in the chat that says Jacob was concerned about them being perceived as thieves, as stealing, okay, because it looked like they had stolen. And according to our Father's eyes, to make right, according to the right ruling, Exodus 22, verse 4 and 5, if indeed you are considered to be stolen from your neighbor, you shall repay back what you have taken plus double. Okay, so that's why he told them to take double silver in their sacks, plus the silver to buy more. So he was going to he was being prepared to keep our Father's right rulings, regardless of what it looks like in the eyes of everyone else, to be right in our Father's eyes. If it perceived that they are thieves, you shall repay double according to the right ruling. Also, it could be that they have grazed their fields bare, and they have to go down to their neighbor for his flock, his herd, those of his household have to feed on the grain of the neighbor because they have grazed their field bare. The right ruling says, Exodus 22, verse 4 and 5, if a thief is indeed found alive, the theft is found alive in his hand, whether it be an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he repays double. And when a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare and lets loose his livestock, and it feeds in another man's field, he repays from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. So I see Jacob, Israel here, honoring two of the right rulings that are given in Exodus 22, where we have a long list of four chapters, I think, of right rulings, which is Mishpat, Strong's H4941. And I think these are important, especially to us these days as we're gathered together to dwell amongst one another and to honor our Father's instructions, because the Mishpat, the right rulings, according to David in Psalms 97:2, it says, clouds and darkness are all around him. Righteousness and right ruling, Mishpat, are the foundations of his throne. The foundations of our Father's throne are these right rulings that are listed, that we see Jacob honoring right here. Isaiah 51:4 says, listen to me, my people. Give ear to me, O my nations. For the Torah goes forth from me, and my mishpat, my right ruling, is set as a light unto my people. The right rulings that we see Jacob honoring here. And the very first mention ever in the whole scriptures for right rulings, that these right rulings, that they knew, obviously they knew these right rulings before they were spelled out to us in Exodus, as we would perceive. In Genesis 18:17 through 19, our Father says about Abraham that he is certainly to become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him so that he commands his children and his household after him to guard the way of Yah, to do righteousness and mishpat, right ruling, so that Yah brings to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So I just want to point out that those two right rulings that would be often overlooked, or have overlooked many times, Jacob honoring these two right rulings, and he putting his trust in our Father that all will be well with Benjamin, and he's guarding the ways of our Father, knowing that our Father will protect Benjamin when he goes down there. So praise Yah.
Very good, brother. Very good. You know what stands out to me in this chapter is when Yehuda stands up and basically puts his life on the line for Benjamin and speaks up for him, and he's going to do it again here, I think, in the next either the next chapter or next week's Torah portion. But someone asked in the chat, why didn't Yosef just reveal himself to his brothers from the beginning, from the outset? I really believe that we see him. He's looking to see what what kind of men are his brothers now after all this time, after what they did to him and all. If he revealed himself from the beginning, well, it wouldn't be apparent whether they really had changed, or whether they had a change of heart, or whether they had spiritually matured or were repentant of what they had done. Because if he had revealed himself from the outset, then by default he still has the upper hand over them. He still is a great position of power, and they're not. And so that it would have been easy for them to act like they're humble toward him, and all because of his position of power. But he was testing them to see what kind of men they were in the matter of their youngest brother Benjamin, who he perceived would be his father's favorite, among them, since he was not in the picture anymore. So I really do believe this is just him testing them and feeling them out to see what kind of men they were. But I think it's remarkable to see the transformation, the spiritual transformation of Yehuda, who, he was the one who, he didn't want to kill Yosef, but he wanted to sell. He was the one that came up with the idea of selling him, selling him into the hands of foreigners, and basically delivering him up for silver. And so he goes from being that way to his brother Yosef, to putting his life on the line for Benjamin. And so I'm wondering if the chapter last week folds into the narrative about him and the issue with Tamar. I wonder if that wasn't put in there, not only to see where the lineage of Yeshua is coming from, but also to see a shift for Yehuda, a turning point. Maybe that was like a catalyst for change in his heart, to realize, to kind of, to be a little bit more spiritually mature and discerning, and kind of shift his ways there back toward righteousness, and being taking the leadership role that he was next in line for, the Bechor role.
Yeah, I agree with everything Chris was saying, and Tobiah as well. We cannot appreciate or truly appreciate what kind of the gift of salvation has been given to us until we have come under testing. And it's that way. It was that way with Joseph testing his brothers to see just how far they had come in their lives, or how far they had dropped. I mean, he didn't know. So he's giving these tests out, and we are the same way. And anyone who accepts Yeshua, anyone who seeks out salvation, comes under testing, because it's only through testing, only through fire, that we are refined. And it's something that a lot of people at Christian churches today don't necessarily teach that kind of stuff. It's always the easy feely, blessing. If you give to this particular ministry, you're going to be blessed. If you're not being blessed and you haven't given enough, there's all kinds of things that are out there today that take away from this whole concept of being tested by fire. And I think this is what Joseph was doing here with his brothers. He was putting them to the test, even more so in the next chapter coming up, when they with regard to Benjamin. So, and another thing I'd like to make a point here is, I think I mentioned last week, literally every year when I read this story, I study it, I weep. I'm a visual person, most men are, and I visualize myself being in Joseph's place, seeing these brothers come before him, not having seen him for so long, and what he must have felt. And I weep. I cry when I read this story. And there's nothing wrong with that. Our society today has put a taboo on men crying, on men weeping. It's a sign of weakness. But getting a little choked up here just talking about it. But it's not a sign of weakness. I mean, we go in scriptures. Jacob wept, David wept, Hezekiah wept, Peter wept, Yeshua wept. There's 2 accounts of him weeping. So it's when we truly feel that point in our lives where we just want to drop to our knees and cry out to God. There's no shame in that. It's a good thing. And there's people in this room I know have wept recently. So I just want to put that out there. When the feeling comes on, you just let it go.
Amen, brother. Go ahead, Brother John.
I was just wondering, do you think that he put his brothers in the same cell that he was in when he was in the prison? You know, when he was doing the dream interpretations for the baker and the cup holder. Maybe he put his brothers in the same cells that he was in.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Yeah. Yeah, there's two other things here, kind of, what Brother Max was saying about weeping, and we see Yosef weep here. He goes to weep because he's overcome, and I kind of see that also as kind of a foreshadow of Yeshua, because you know that Yeshua wept too in the matter of Lazarus, uh, and then also he had their feet washed. Yosef had their feet washed, and this is something else that Yeshua did for his Talmudim. Those that were beneath him, he on bended knee washed the feet of his own students. And so I just see so much rich foreshadowing here of our Messiah and things that he did. And wow, I mean, we could go, we could go through these all over again, again and again, and still see them. So it's they still see more even. So anybody else have anything on?
Just to follow up on that, Chris. Yeshua wept over Lazarus, but here, Joseph is weeping basically over his brothers, and Yeshua also wept over Jerusalem. When he looked down, and was lamentating about Jerusalem and what would be happening to it because of their disobedience, because they didn't listen. And so there's a lot of
Yeah, he said, Jerusalem, you who stone the prophets, how I wish I could gather you like a mother hen gathers its chicks under her wings.
Amen. John's hand is up. Do you have something else, John?
Yeah,
No,
ahead, John.
no, but I was going to start typing stuff, so I might as well say it instead. I was just thinking, during this time, the Father, when he ended the world in Noah's time, he ended it by water, right? And people need water to survive, right? But it's irony that how water killed the earth at that time. And then during Joseph's time, right? The only way that they found, survival is through food, right? The Father probably used the drying up of the earth, right, as a way to get people, because when the earth is drought, right, people start to pray to the Father, right? No matter what religion they are, they all look towards the Father for help, for send rain and stuff like that. So it's probably his way of getting people to try to get back in touch with him, right? And then now, this is not scripture, but nowadays, so we went through the destroying of the earth by water, which we need. Then we went into food, which we need. And now we as people are destroying our earth, right, for the air. We're destroying the air that we need, right? So, it's I was just like making this correlation of the needs of people, right, and how that's reflected in the scriptures and stuff like that.
Thank you, buddy. Good point there for sure. Anybody else have anything on 43 here? Okay, we'll go on to chapter 44, Genesis chapter 44 for those just joining us. And we're going to go from verse 1 to verse 17, I believe it is. Would somebody like to read that for us, please?
I'll read it. And he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food. It's King James Version, my apologies. As much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses. And when they were gone out of the city, and not far off, Joseph said unto his steward, up, follow after the men, and when thou overtake them, say unto them, wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this it in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby indeed he divideth? Ye have done evil in so doing. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them these same words. And they said unto him, wherefore said my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servants should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths, we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of the Lord's house silver or gold? Whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondsmen. And he said, now also let it be according unto your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. Then they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched and began at the eldest, and left at youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, and laded every man his ass, and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that ye have done? Wot ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? And Judah said, what shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do so, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get you up in peace unto your father.
Thank you, Brother Andrew. So that actually concludes our Torah portion, and they left it on a cliffhanger, didn't they? Wow. Anybody have any thoughts on this first part of this chapter here?
I want to say something about what he said earlier about us destroying our resources, things that are the things that us as people need. And psychologically, it's not something that we do, but sociologically, like as a group, as a whole, we tend to do it. We tend to destroy our resources. And I don't think it's obviously not something that we all do on purpose, but I think it's like a subconscious thing, like a fulfilling of scripture type thing. I think it's deep within us calling out and saying we want this physical reality to be destroyed. We don't want to rely on the flesh. We want to be in the spiritual. We want to be in the spirit with the Father. Like, I think it's a good thing for us to destroy the flesh as a whole. But at the same time, it's a good idea for us to keep good care of our temples so that he can live within us until he decides that it's right for us to be in the spirit with him.
Thank you, Brother Tom. Go ahead, John.
All right. So this is going to be a little complicated, and it's dealing with the verse where he refers to the silver cup that Joseph uses for divination. And people are going to say, but I'm sure that he really didn't use that cup for divination. He really, basically, that was just to say the significance that it was Joseph's special cup, right? But I'd have to kind of tend to maybe disagree with that theory a little bit, because back in the day when Moses was in Egypt and stuff like that, the I don't know if you want to call them wizards or whatever you call them, the magicians, right? Cast down their rods, and then Moses cast down his rod, and his serpent ate up their serpents, right? So, the fact is that in Egypt, where Joseph is right now, he probably was, practicing some of the customs of divination, but not using. He was more of a dream interpreter, which got him to his position, right? But the fact is that goblet was probably actually a goblet that was probably used not necessarily by Joseph for divination, but probably a goblet used for divination. That's all I had to say, because the correlation between, that Egypt actually did use implements of magic in that time period.
I agree with you completely on that, brother. I thought that last year reading that over, and yeah, I agree with you completely. It's not something that Joseph used, but it was completely at his disposal to use as an option for him.
I see it more like a symbol of his power. It was one of the, probably the equivalent of, like, somebody's rod or staff. In Egypt, that cup would have been a symbol of his power. But we can see clearly that he gives Elohim all the credit. He gives Yah the credit for the dream interpretations and the power to do that. And so, I don't see him needing that at all. When he's as close as he is with Yah. As far as the gifting that Yah blessed him with. So.
I'm not saying that he was using that goblet as for divination. What I was saying is that goblet, of all the silver goblets that could have been in Egypt, for instance, that particular goblet could have had like sigils and all sorts of magical charms and stuff placed upon it, where that particular goblet stood out from all the rest of the goblets in the particular kingdom. It actually was probably ornated with symbols and all sorts of stuff that made that particular goblet used for divination, and that would be within Joseph's court at that time. It wasn't just any old goblet that was silver in the kingdom. So I'm sure they had plenty of silver goblets.
Yeah, I think that most likely it was something to do with the rulers. Probably the goblet that they had. People thought they could see the future with it, and because he could interpret dreams, the Egyptians probably could not understand that he wasn't doing it of his own, and they had to assign something to say this is how he's doing it. So that's probably why I believe it got called that, and he just allowed them to call it that.
There are some similarities to this too. How this happened with Benjamin, and this cup and all is found in his effects, and it's kind of similar with Rachel, his mother, having the idol or whatever, the idols from Laban's house with her, and Jacob says something similar. He says whoever it's found with, is basically that your life is forfeit, and there's some similarities there.
He's just trying to get them to come close, right? Because he knows who they are, and he's going to do whatever he can to kind of draw them in. I wonder if he would have told them right away that he was their brother, if they would have accepted him. I mean, he's dressed differently. He doesn't look like them. It would be really strange. So he's kind of got to ease them in. It's sort of like say a Torah believer trying to reach out to Jewish Torah believers. It's like they see you, but you're dressed differently, and they don't understand who you are. But you got to kind of ease your way in. And I don't mean to say he's using tricks, but he's just, he's got to be smooth about it. Or I'm not sure what I'm saying.
I see him just also testing them out to see what, how they are now, after having sold him out for silver, that he wanted to see, well, are they the same? Do they have the same maliciousness in their heart for my younger brother Benjamin, who is also, one of my father's favorites? They want to see if they're gonna stick up for him and vouch for him and all that, and try to, keep him from harm now. And he's testing them in that way to see whether there's been any change in them over these years.
Right.
And I agree. I think too that it was all part of his disguise, if you will, and to keep his brothers, to prevent his brothers from knowing who he really was at that point, because he hadn't revealed himself yet. And so he's asking them. And my scripture here, my version says he's asking them, "Don't you know it? That a man like me practices divination." I'm sure they've heard of his reputation throughout the world about how wise and smart this man Joseph was and still is, and how he came to know what was going on. So I think that because of that he's basically testing them, but also kind of tricking them at the same time, and into believing that this is where he gets his power, was through this cup, when in fact we all know that it was through Yah that his power came, but he couldn't reveal it to his brothers at that point. It wasn't ready. It wasn't the time.
Also, another point.
That's the way I see it.
Oh, you can go ahead, Toba. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, brother.
Another point that I always think about is the brothers weren't aware that Benjamin did not steal it. They were just going off of their family belief initially, saying we would never do this stuff. But then, even though there was a presumption that he stole it, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to allow Benjamin to go back home.
Did you have something, Tom, you was wanting to share?
I was telling the brother that that's the way I see it too.
Right on. Yeah, I agree too. I believe I was looking into this word divine. It's nakesh, Hebrew strong number 5172, and it only comes up 11 times, according to Strong's in the King James. And so after looking and examining all 11 usages, it doesn't look good at all. I mean, and then in Leviticus 19:26, it says, "You shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall you use nakesh," which is this word for divining or divination, nor observe times. And in Deuteronomy 18, it says, there shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination or observer of times, or an enchanter. That word right there again, an enchanter is nakesh, or a witch. And kings, they do it again. It says that Laban learned by divining, but we also know that Laban, it's in Genesis chapter 30. We also know that Laban had house idols, because Rahel took the house idols from her fathers and hid them from him. But so after examining these 11 usages, 3 times they use that word here in chapter 44 that we read today. And I believe it's like Brother Max was saying, that he was just playing the part for them. I don't believe Joseph would have been actually divining by that. I think he was just leading on to them as though he was that type of a man, playing that role to not lead into who he really truly was at the time. But I really honestly think, out of his fear and reverence for the Most High, for our Father, that he certainly would not participate in something such as that, because the scriptures bear witness of it being an ugly thing all the way through Kings, Chronicles, and Leviticus is being very, very bad in our Father's eyes. So, somebody wants to research it, it's Strong's number 5172. That word,
Shabbat Shalom. Very
Shabbat
good
Shalom.
discussion. If we go back to when when Joseph was sharing with Pharaoh about his dream, Pharaoh said, "Can we find such a one as this, a man whom is the spirit, in whom is the spirit of God, of Yah?" And when Joseph is talking about the divination, well, think about this. He's in the land of Egypt. They don't understand who Yah is. And here is Pharaoh giving a testimony of this man. He said, there's no one as wise and as discerning as Joseph. Imagine talking about the Elohim of Israel to people that don't know who he is. To them, that's another deity who's given this guy some power to discern and to be wise. So when Joseph is talking to his brothers, remember, he's got all the Egyptians all around him. So he's not gonna tell them, hey, Yod He Vav He, because they would know. So it seems like he is just it doesn't say, but it might have been that the whole land thinks this man, his power and his discernment and his wisdom is, they see it as divination. I mean, that what all the Gentiles do. I remember in Africa, my mom, she was just telling us that that our relatives, because she was from a father who had several wives, and she was Muslim, and she was just telling us that when she started becoming a Christian and she started praying, that Abba really protected her. So they thought she had another power, and they try to get to her, and they're always saying that, where does she get her power from? They don't know the creator, but they know she goes to church. They know she's doing this, but they just don't know where she gets her power from, because my mom is a prayer warrior. So to them, they assume that she got her power from, that there must be some we call them babalawos, which is like people that you go in the bush and you kill somebody and you take the head of somebody, you take it to them and they give you power. You have to make some kind of sacrifice. So they're thinking like, my goodness, where did she go and get her power? So I'm looking at it from an Eastern perspective, that they're looking at this man that, hey, he's pretty much speaking their language. That, don't you know that such a man as me has the power of, can, what did he say? Let me read it. Such a man as me, what verse was that, guys? I'm sorry. Okay, he said, what deed is it that you have done? Did you not know such a man as I can certainly practice divination? I believe this is what the whole I believe this is what the people in Egypt see him as. So I just think he's just speaking the language the Egyptians understand.
Yeah, it's also in verse 4 and 5. It says, when they had gone out of the city, not having gone far, Joseph said to one over his house, rise up and follow the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is this not the one from which my master drinks? and with which he indeed divines that you have done evil, what you have done. So that word divine, Nakesh, is actually there twice in verse 5, where it says indeed divines is actually Nakesh. And but yeah, there's the three uses.
Yeah, it's like he was using the power of Yeshua all this time, but then just kind of sitting back and letting people think what they think, and really not doing much about it, and just quietly being a servant of Yahweh.
Do you guys know divination cups is actually a popular thing in Egypt? If you go and research it, Egyptians actually and other cultures use it. Are using, like, it's actually silver cups that they use in particular, that they use for to drink, and they will see things. Sometimes you can look in it, and sometimes some people use a crystal ball, they use a chicken liver, they use a stone, a pond, and all these all this stuff that they use to see things or to contact spirits in the other world and everything. And sometimes in Africa they use a staff, and I mean, so many different objects are used, but the Egyptians were known for using silver cups.
Does anybody know any more about that? What's having to do with wine, like divining by wine? I heard like they would put like blood in the wine, and they would divine by the way that the wine and the blood swirled or mixed or something like that. I was curious because, in particular, Daniel would not drink. Not only would he not eat of any slaughtered animals when he was in captivity, he didn't just say, don't give me chicken or don't give me pork or shellfish, just only give me chicken and beef or whatever. But he also would not drink of the wine. And I was wondering if anybody knew that had to do, divining by wine had to do with blood or anything like that.
Yeah, it could be, Brother Tobiah, that the king had defiled the wine in some way like that, and that's why he didn't want it. But it also could be that Daniel just that he just wanted to be sober minded and not be given over to to more fleshly thinking or whatever.
Yeah, it could be. I thought about that too, and I thought about it like, wine is something like they had at like the weddings, and they did it at a time of rejoicing, and perhaps like Daniel was very stern about, this is not a time of rejoicing when we're living in captivity, when Jerusalem is trodden down and his people are led astray and captured like that, and so that he wouldn't partake in a festive rejoicing. That wine is for a time such as that, and that could also be the case.
Yeah.
The wineskins.
Why don't we go on to the go ahead, brother.
I was saying wineskins can also be made of pigskin, so it's possible that they use pigskin to make the wineskins in Babylon.
Oh, okay, good. I never thought of that. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, maybe it was just made in an unclean way or something. So let's go on to the Haftorah there in First Kings. I don't know if someone that hasn't read yet wants to read First Kings chapter 3, starting in verse 15 and going through chapter 4, verse 1, depending on the ordering of your verses in your version. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 15 through chapter 4, 1. Would someone like to read that that hasn't read yet?
I can read it. Brother, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, brother.
Okay, 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1. It's going to be through the scriptures, ISR, Institute for Scripture Research. Shlomo awoke, and see, it was a dream. And he came into Jerusalem, and he stood before the ark of the covenant of Yah, and offered up burnt offerings and made peace offerings, and he made a feast for all his servants. Then 2 women, whores, came to the sovereign and stood before him. And one woman said, O my master, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. And it came to be the 3rd day after I had given birth, that this woman also gave birth. And we were together, and there was no one else with us in the house, only the 2 of us in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night, because she lay on him. And she rose up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side, while your female servant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And I rose up in the morning to nurse my son, and saw that he was dead. But I looked at him closely in the morning, and saw he was not my son whom I had born. And the other woman said, No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. And the first woman said, No, for the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. And they spoke before the sovereign. And the sovereign said, The one says, This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one, while the other says, No, for your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. And the sovereign said, Bring me a sword. So they brought a sword before the sovereign. And the sovereign said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other. And the woman whose son was living spoke to the sovereign, for she was overcome with compassion for her son. And she said, Oh, my master, give her the living child, and by no means kill him. But the other said, Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him. And the sovereign answered and said, Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. And all of Israel heard of the right ruling which the sovereign had rendered, and they feared the sovereign, for they saw that the wisdom of the Most High was in him to do right ruling. And it came to be that sovereign Shlomo was sovereign over all Israel.
Thank you, brother, for reading that. Any thoughts or comments on this on 1 Kings?
I think it's funny. Well, not funny because a child died, but I think it's interesting, almost like a warning to mothers, because the mother that killed the kid was, one, she displayed that she was unloving, and the way that she killed her child was by smothering him.
And she was ready to kill the other one too. She's like, cut him up.
I would like to point out or suggest, I guess I could say, some translations will read that verse 16 says the 2 women were whores. Some translations will say they were prostitutes or harlots or whatnot. And I would like to suggest that the word there does not mean they're prostitutes. I don't believe that King Solomon in the temple, that they were dealing with prostitution in the midst of the camp and the courts of Yashrael. I believe that word, just like in the reference to Rahab, I don't believe she was a prostitute or harlot either. I believe that term was just used in general to whoring, which is having relations outside of marriage. And in particular, I believe they're talking about women who had bore children that had not been taken by a husband, who had no husband. They had children outside of marriage. It does not necessarily mean they were prostituting themselves or so forth. So I wanted to suggest that consideration.
Well, brother, at the same time, you know, Solomon being a judge, and remember also Moses with everybody with all kinds of problems were coming to bring their problems. So guilty or no guilty, cutting adultery, all that stuff, they were bringing them all in front of the judge. So it wasn't just innocent people coming before the judge because they were clean and they couldn't come around the temple and anything like that. These were people that were looking for decisions to be made on a matter. So the guilty and the unguilty has to appear before to get the judgment. So I see it differently.
Brother John, go ahead.
All right. About the part about certain types of prostitutes, they had like the cult prostitutes, where particular prostitutes would actually be for particular cults. I think, which we discuss something like that last week when he went and got a cult prostitute, and but it was actually the lady that was actually in disguise, because that she wanted his seed, because that he wouldn't give up his younger son or something to the effect. But anyways, the cult prostitutes, that's kind of like also a representation of the whore of Babylon, right? Where in Revelation, and stuff like that, which I think is representation of the United States, but that's just my interpretation of that. But I'm not going to get into that. But that they had cult prostitutes, which doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who was sleeping out of wedlock, but actually who does that as part of their faith, because that's what they did, so to please their false deity.
And it seems to me that them doing that is like a manifestation of something going on spiritually, a bad thing going on spiritually with most people,
I also think this story shows the wisdom of Solomon, because at those times, in those days, those children would have been considered nothing, because most likely their father would have been unknown. So they would have been considered to be just cast-offs. But Solomon still valued the child's life and decided to figure out who he was and give him back to his rightful mother.
That's very, very good. We see kind of the connection or the correlation to the Torah portion is really just, this is just a kind of a connection between the wisdom of Yosef and the wisdom of Shlomo, both being elevated to positions of being a ruler over the people and having great wisdom and sorting matters out and that kind of thing. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the passage from Romans in the Brit Hadasha. We got a passage from Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. If someone would like to read that hasn't read yet before. Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 13, please.
I'll read it.
Okay,
I'm
go ahead,
reading
sister. Thank you.
I'm reading from the RSTNE version. And it says, Yisraelite brothers, my love's desire and tefillah to Yahuwah for is Yisrael, that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal for Yahuwah, but not according to Dayat. For they, being ignorant of Yahuwah's Zedekah, go about to establish their own Zedekah, have not submitted themselves to the Zedekah of Yahuwah. For Mashiach is the actual goal of the Torah for an eternal Zedek, standing to everyone that believes. For Moshe describes the Zedekah that comes from the Torah, that the man who does those things shall live by them. But the Zedekah that is of Amunah speaks in this manner. Say not in your love, who shall ascend into the Shamayim, that is to bring the Moshiach down from above, or who shall descend into the deep, that is to bring up the Moshiach again from the dead. But what does Torah actually say? The word is near you, even in your mouth and in your lev, that is the word of Amunah, which we proclaim, that if you shall confess with your mouth the Master Yeshua, and shall believe in your lev that Yahuwah has raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. For with the lev man believes to Zedekah, and with the mouth confession is made to Yahushua. For the Ketuvah says, whoever believes on him shall not be ashamed or disgraced. For there is no difference between the Yehudi and the Greek or Aramean. For the same Master Yahuwah is over all and is rich in Rakamin to all that call upon him. For whoever shall call upon the name of the Master Yahushua shall be saved.
Thank you, sister. So for Messiah, verse 4, for Messiah is the goal of the Torah unto righteousness to everyone who believes. Any thoughts or comments on this passage from Romans, please?
He that knows my commands and keeps them, the same it is that loves me. And he that loves me will be loved of my Father, and I will reveal myself to him.
You know, when people read this, a lot of Sunday pastors have used this to actually discredit the Torah because of no knowledge of the Torah. So when they read this, they're reading this as like, okay, look, for Messiah is the end of the law. I mean, look at what that says. I mean, it's so, the interpretation is just so wrong. For Messiah is the end of the Torah for righteousness to everyone that believeth. Well, what's that telling us? And then it says, for Moses described the righteousness which is of the Torah, which we read in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 25, that, and it shall be our righteousness if we do all that is written in the book, in this law. It should be our righteousness. Okay, so that the man that doeth those things, shall live by them. We say it's talking about the righteousness of faith, but the righteousness which is of faith. Speak it this wise, say not in your heart, who shall ascend to heaven? It's talking about, the Torah that is written on our hearts. It said and this, he's quoting the same thing that was quoted in the Torah, that the word is not far from you. It's not, but it's the goal is to have it written on your heart. but you have to have faith in that Messiah first. You have to have faith that he's right, that the righteousness that is in him, can also be obtained by you keeping the Torah. And it's just, but when you read this, it seems like all this mumbo jumbo that people do not really, Paul's writings, sometimes they baffled me myself, because and it's just this English interpretation is just, it's not, bottom line, it's just not good. The only way to be able to discern and understand this, like the same Paul that was writing, Shaul that was writing to us, he gives us a qualification to read his letters. What is the qualification to read his letters? I'll just read this and then I'm done. Here's the qualification for you to even, before you can think of reading any of Paul's letters, you have to have a qualification. And Paul talks about that qualification in Romans chapter 7. And here it is. So if you don't have this, you have no business in any shape of any form or anyhow reading any of Paul's letters. Paul says in Romans chapter 7, verse 1, know ye not, brethren. And then in parentheses, he puts, for I speak to them that not understand, not read, not whatever. He goes, I speak to them that know the law. How that the law had dominion over a man as long as he lives. So he's talking about, you need to know this law. You need to know this Torah before you can. He's not just speaking to anybody. So if you don't have these qualifications, put it down. You will never, ever, ever, ever understand Paul's letters. And Peter talks about if you don't understand it, you will read it, and because the way he writes, you will read it, and what would you do? You will twist it to your own destruction. That's what's happening.
Second Peter.
Can't study quantum physics if you don't know basic arithmetic.
So, Brother Jacob, that's like if I had intercepted a letter between you and your brother John, right? Like if I had intercepted that letter, you might have some very good things, some things that I could apply, generally to my life, but ultimately, the intended audience was your brother John, and he knows and understands a lot more of what you're talking about directed to him than I ever could, taking that letter out of context. And that's exactly what you're sharing here with 7:1 here, Romans 7:1. That's it. And thank you for sharing that and bringing.
To kind of add a little bit to what Jacob was just saying, with verse 4, mine reads, for Mashiach is the goal of Torah for righteousness to everyone that believes in him. And I think that's the better translation, because Yeshua Messiah is, once we recognize who he is and accept him, that is the goal of Torah. You have obtained that goal. It's not an end to it. It's actually the beginning. So we have reached that or obtained that goal when we recognize who he is.
And Yeshua points to the Torah as a right way of living too. He points to it again and again, and it points forward to him and speaks of him. Prophesies and all. So it is the way. When he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," John 14:6. That he is demonstrating. He is the model. He is the Torah lived out and breathed out. He's the spoken word of Elohim, and he shows us exactly how we can follow in his steps in that way and be.
There's two stipulations for being saved. One is to confess that Yeshua is Adonai, and the other one is to believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead. But, and I want to emphasize the and. There's two of them. It's not and or, it's just and. You have to confess that he is the master and believe in your heart that he has been raised from the dead. And how can you confess the one and only Yeshua Messiah as master if you think he's somebody else? If you're confessing this churchianity Jesus as Lord, that's not fulfilling the stipulation. That's fulfilling close to the stipulation, but then something that isn't Yeshua, HaMashiach, is master over your life. And we can all just keep on hoping that we're getting closer and closer to who he truly is. Even when we know him by his real name, or that's why we need the law. That's what the law does. It reveals to us who he is, so that we can confess him as being master over our life, even as we get closer and closer and closer to learning not something that is a really good representation of him, but exactly him.
Tom,
anybody else?
Well, I agree with Tom, right, to a certain point. He's absolutely right. However, if someone has come, let's say for instance they're Muslim, and they come to know Yahusha as Jesus, and they accept Jesus as their personal Lord and Savior, and that he came and he died and he rose from the grave 3 days later, and everything, and he comes to know that through the name Jesus, and he just hasn't come to understand the truth that of the name, that his name is Yahusha or whatever, right? Then we are. It's not you or I who says whether a person is saved or not. It is the Father who has determined through the Spirit, the righteous Spirit, whether he is an individual is saved. Whether we use the sacred names or not, the Father knows the heart, and it is not individual words or sounds of words that one is saved, but rather through the righteous Spirit and one's being. And the Father has predetermined this way before we were even born. So I for one, particular and believe in the names, because let me give you, for instance, when we say the word God, right? God is an improper term, right? We should probably be using the word Elohim, right? Because for various different reasons. I'm not going to get into sacred name movement or any of that stuff here right now, but I'm just saying that you're right, Tom. That through believing in him as our Lord and Savior, right, and accepting that he raised from the grave, right, 3 days later, right, and then by the changing of ourselves, right, changing of ourselves, of our spirit, and then being baptized in the Spirit and then by water, right, we do accept him as our Savior, and therefore we are saved.
Amen, brother. I agree with what you're saying.
Also, this ties into what Brother Tom and Jacob were saying. When you look at the scriptures in Romans 10, it says, I bear record that they have a zeal for him, but not according to the knowledge, for they being ignorant of his righteousness are going about to establish their own. So yeah, that ties into Christianity, where they'll dress up, they'll go in, you tell them that they have to keep the law. They say, no, it's done away with. But it also ties into some sects of Judaism who only believe the Talmud and don't practice the law to any extent.
I just wanted to point out, I really like verse 12, for there is no difference between the Yehudi and the Greek or the Aramean, for the same master Yahuwah is over all and is rich in rakamim to all that call upon him. And I looked up that word rakamim, and it means compassionate. And I just think for those particular verses, it stands out, just that to all who call upon him, you know, whether they're Yahudi, Greek, Aramean, like Armene. That just speaks a lot to me, that he draws people from every nation. And I just think that that stands out to me the most. You know, he's compassionate, he's loving, and there's a certain way to come to him. But it's like, to me, that verse, it's kind of like an open invitation. And someone was reading from Isaiah 55 this morning, and where he was saying that, come unto me. And I just think like that's beautiful, like that invitation and the love that he has. And then, you know, and then finding out he is Torah, and then, well, what does that mean? Because in verse 3, where it was talking about, for they being ignorant of his righteousness, well, this version says Yahuwah's Zedekah, but I believe that means righteousness, go about to establish their own Zedekah, and have not submitted themselves to the Zedekah of Yahuwah. And then it says, for Moshiach is the actual goal of the Torah. For an eternal Zadik, I'm not sure what that means, is Zadik standing to everyone that believes. So I love that.
Believes Zadik is priesthood.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I love that. It's an invitation, you know, for salvation through the. I just think that's really awesome.
All right. Anybody else have any final thoughts on everything as a whole, the Torah portion, or anything else before we wrap?
I have something to share. It's kind of like a subtopic, if that's okay. I know we're all finished with our study, but it was a subtopic in the chat that we had, and I would share it if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy.
Okay, we were talking about, I guess, we got on about the beast and the false prophet and the whore of Babylon. Well, I've done a lot of research on Revelations 18 and Isaiah 47 about the great city, and it points heavily to New York City and that America being Babylon. But I wanted to share a dream that I had a long time ago. I was incarcerated, and I was heavily into the Bible. It's sad to say, probably even more so then than I was now. It's a day-to-day struggle for sure, but I would meditate and pray and read my Bible daily, have Bible studies daily. And one night, the Father gave me a dream, and in the dream I was on a bus, and I'm sitting on the right-hand side of the bus, and there was a woman sitting on the left. Now, the right hand, or the right, is usually associated with good, and the left is usually associated with evil. And dreams mainly are spoken symbolically. So I wanted to put that in as well. So on the left, there was a woman, and she was a prostitute. She was looking at me. She was very sultry and had a concupiscence or a lustfulness about her. And she was like trying to seduce me, basically. And she lifted up her skirt and it had black underwear. And I'll go through all the symbols of the dream afterwards. And so eventually she wrote down her number and she gave me her number, and I looked upon it, and her name was New York. And that's the dream I had. In the dream, the black represents death. And it says that the lust of her fornication in Revelations 18, you know, all the kings and queens of the earth lusted after her. They wanted her, all her dainties and goodies and delicacies, it says. And it talks about the death of her, and it talks about her fornications. So the black panties represent death. It's symbolic of that. It's also symbolic of lust and fornication. But at the end of the dream, when she gave me her number, above it had her name, and it was New York. That was her name. So God spoke to me And he told me that that is the great city. That is Babylon. That is the city in the future that will be destroyed. And I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Well, thank you for sharing that, brother. And I've heard other people share similar things about Chicago and other big cities. And I'm not saying that to say that your dream wasn't accurate or whatever, but New York City definitely seems to fit a lot of the attributes of what we see in the end there, the end times there being fulfilled, and how the merchants go away dismayed at her destruction because they won't be able to trade or sell their wares anymore. And but we also need to be careful that we don't put too much emphasis on smaller. I mean, what I'm saying is that it could be New York City is kind of the city that's destroyed or whatever that sets things off. But we need to be on guard that we don't think too small when it comes to the enemy. Also, I mean, I believe that Babylon, the beast system, and Babylon is a world. It's a world system. It's not just limited to some place in the United States. And that city very well may be kind of like one of the hearts of it, or a big part of it, or a symbolic part of it. But it's a world system. And spiritually, Yah is calling us out of that world system even now. He's speaking to people. He's calling them. He's bringing the scales off their eyes, and he's telling us to wake up and come out of her, my people, right now. It's happening right now. Spiritually, we're waking up to his truth. We're coming back to his ancient ways, Jeremiah 6:16, and he's waking us up and telling us to come out of Babylon spiritually and turn our hearts back to the Father. So. Although we can see attributes in cities like that, we also have to look spiritually at these things too. I'm not saying that not everything we don't allegorize everything away, but I'm just saying that there's a bigger picture beyond New York City, and that is the world system, that he's calling us all out of, and it's good to be mindful of that. And when we see this matter about Yosef and the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, I do believe that there's a prophetic aspect to that as well, of readiness and preparedness. That while Yah is blessing us with times of abundance, that we need to, I'm not saying that we got to all go be preppers and stock up a bunch of ammo. What I'm saying is, even more so physically, is being spiritually ready, a spiritual preparedness, a spiritual readiness, and storing up and gleaning from his word now while we are able to, because there may come a day soon, and there is now already in the world places where you can't openly read the scriptures anymore, and you can't have scripture studies like what we're doing here today. And so we need to have a spiritual readiness and hide his word in our hearts so we don't sin against him. Hide it in our hearts so that it's in there, it's inside of us, and we can live by it from what we can glean now. And when the day comes when it's not readily available anymore, those that study to show themselves approved, we're going to be like pathfinders for those that don't have access to the scriptures, and it's going to be important for us to shine a light even brighter in an ever darkening world. So I pray that we can all glean the spiritual application from the 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, and the 7 years of famine, and that we can become more spiritually prepared and have a spiritual readiness in our hearts for what's to come, and that can include persecution and other things that are not going to be comfortable or pleasant. We're very blessed right now living in the Western cultures that we do. Most of us that live in these Western cultures where the extent of our persecution comes in the form of maybe verbal attacks or ad hominem attacks, and more of a social shaming kind of thing, or social judgmentality toward things of faith. But that's very mild compared to many believers in other areas of the world that are being beheaded even now and tortured and all for the name of Messiah. And so we just need to be on guard and be prepared and draw close to Mashiach, and and He will guard our hearts and our minds.
I wanted to say also, Chris, that the verses that interest me are the Revelations 18 and Isaiah 47. Even in Isaiah 47, it sounds like they're talking about the Statue of Liberty. It says she's standing straight up on like some sort of pose. It says, "Lift up thy skirt, or thy dress," and she's wearing a long dress, the actual statue. It also says, "Let down thy locks," and her locks and everything are underneath that crown that she has on. But there's definitely, I believe that the whole beast system is worldwide for sure, and the devil has infiltrated almost every aspect of society. We just have to love and be prepared, and even unto death.
Right. So look, we'll go ahead and wrap here because that's a great topic, and but we'll go ahead and wrap for today on the study. And let me stop this here.